So, Danny runs his own consultancy. He has been involved in research, and is still involved in research, but as a researcher working with RI, but now very much focuses around learning and development. And tonight's presentation is all about communicating insight, which is what most of us have to do on a fairly regular basis, so any assistance we get in that regard is very welcome. So, Danny, very much welcome to the ICG. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Yeah, I was saying to Robin just a minute ago that this year, I'm not sure if celebrate is the right word, but I entered my 25th year in the research and insight business. As Arthur said, I spent many years as a researcher and then moved into learning and development. My last incarnation was as Worldwide Director of Learning and Development at Research International, and left coming up to 8 years ago, so before the TNS merger. When I first set up on my own, anything around presentations that I was asked to sort of train on or coach on tended to be around the kind of stand and deliver element, you know, to sort of take your hands out of your pockets and face front sort of thing. Increasingly though, I am being asked to focus on this kind of area, so the stuff that happens before you get up on your feet and take your hands out of your pockets. And what I'm seeing is that I think it's largely being driven by the client side, who are basically saying, you know, we need to make the output, the results, the deliverable, if you like, land within the organisation. And increasingly we're concerned that people are either not listening to or not reading what we produce, not understanding it, not grasping it, and certainly not doing anything with it. And I'm certainly seeing a lot of pressure now on research agencies to then try and make their communication of research and insight more concise, more crystallised, clearer, shorter, more actionable, more meaningful, more resonant, etc. Probably over the last sort of 18 months, maybe over half of the work that I've done has been in this area. Largely, I have to say, on the client side, but also with some research agencies. So what I'm going to take you through is, in many ways, just a very, very quick sort of cook's tour of my sort of views in this area. For anyone that's seen me deliver anything like this recently, I'm afraid this is going to be very old territory, because just to show sort of how sort of pertinent this is and relevant this is at the moment, you know, I've recently delivered 2 sessions for the MRS, members' evenings for them, quite a lot of stuff at SMR. I'm actually doing something at the SMR Congress in Dublin in September with Lucy Davison from Caine's Mustard Marketing, who some of you might know of. And I think, you know, this is really quite a sort of a hot topic. I think I would start off with sort of two analogies. What I'm going to cover is very much a sort of a buffet, a sort of a smorgasbord of hopefully fairly sort of appetising, tasty tidbits, but I leave it entirely up to you what you actually do find most appealing and what you take away. And I'm also aware, you know, given the level of seniority and experience and expertise in the room, I'm in danger of maybe teaching grandmothers to suck eggs. So I'd maybe sort of see this as almost like an MOT, just to, you know, an opportunity just for sort of 45 minutes to take the car off the road and just check what's already ticking over quite nicely, and maybe where, you know, you could do with a bit of recalibration. My starting point for this is actually thinking about, you know, users of research, and a little while ago I conducted some research along with a few associates into views around research output, and I could have chosen many quotations that pretty much said the same as this. A research presentation always stands out. They contain a lot of information, all structured in the same way. Slide after slide of too much data. They don't get to the point quickly enough. And again, a conversation I was having before this session, where I said, I still actually meet people. You know, I mean, I actually met someone today that had a 90-slide presentation deck. Yeah, I mean, I still see debriefs that are ordered, believe it or not, in the, structured in the order of the questionnaire or the discussion guide. Yeah, we asked this question and this was the answer. We then asked this question and that was the answer. I still see debriefs where we have the quant reported on and then the qual, or vice versa. When actually, arguably, the audience don't give a damn where it came from, but what actually came out and what it means for them and what they do with it. But unfortunately, I said I've been in the business for 25 years. I can remember us having these kind of conversations 2 decades ago. And unfortunately, I don't think, as a whole, the research industry has moved on as quickly as it ought to have and learned the lessons that it ought to have had. And I think, we ought to do it now, because I think the client, the end user's world is changing. We as consumers of communication, we know we're increasingly bombarded with stuff. I saw an article in the Metro only recently which said that the average commuter just wandering around London in a day is exposed to between, I think it was 1,600 and 3,000 marketing messages in a day. The average C-suite executive in the UK receives 632 emails a day. And if actually what we're doing and what we're producing is having to sort of cut through those other 631 emails, if what we're actually trying to communicate is actually going to get read and get understood and get acted upon, arguably how we communicate has got to change. And I think, as users of information, as users of communication, we expect knowledge just to be there, to be easy. We don't want to have to work at it. We expect it to be intuitive. We expect it to be accessible. We expect it to be clear and short and crisp and concise and inspiring and engaging, etc., etc. And again, apologies if I'm sort of preaching to grandmothers here, but invariably I find that a lot of researchers forget that the end users are not researchers. In terms of the language they use, the terminology they use. I saw a debrief recently that was banging on about magnitude estimation. Nowhere did it explain what magnitude estimation was. The communicator, the sender, the creator of this communication had made the fatal error that because they were an expert in mag-est, so was everyone else reading it. And I always think, invariably, the people who are on the receiving end of this are not researchers. They have a day job. They have so many other calls upon their time, on their patience. And therefore, we need to actually think about them rather than us. We need to forget whether this was qual or quant. We need to forget what order in which we ask the questions. We need to be thinking about the end users and addressing their business issues and looking for overarching themes and giving them something to act upon. And I think that's why I always try and remind myself, research is a means to an end, and a means to their end. Incidentally, if anyone doesn't know what magnitude estimation is, it's a technique, I think, quantitative technique, which basically sort of says to a respondent, how important are various attributes. So if this one's worth 100, is this worth 20 or 200? As I say.
Representation.
Indeed. I call this coping with infobesity. The fact that we are increasingly bombarded with all this stuff. And unfortunately, although we are increasingly bombarded with this stuff, as are the users of research, the cognitive limits of our brains haven't increased in step. And so increasingly, the brain has to edit and filter what it takes in. And arguably, as communicators, the more we can do the editing and filtering before our stuff hits other people's brains, the greater the chances of it going in, of it lodging, of it being remembered, and of it being acted upon. And the final thing, for now that I throw in is just thinking about also the way that things look. With the rise of what I call data journalism and infographics. And again, if what we are producing is having to fight for sort of airtime and attention amongst all this kind of stuff, why should anyone look at ours? And again, why should anyone remember it? I'm not a great fan of using sort of graphics and visuals just to make something look pretty, but I think the way that something looks can have a huge impact upon whether people actually get it and understand it and whether they remember it. And I quite often think that the research or insight industry does itself a huge disservice, because usually there's a lot of time and effort and intellect and creativity and blood, sweat and tears that's gone into the research, and then we fail to sort of deliver on that at the end. We fail to actually land it, and so we've wasted all of that time and effort and blood, sweat and tears, and arguably, the end user's money as well. So I think, we should try and do ourselves a service by actually making sure that there is a return on all of that investment. And you can have the most brilliant story in the world. If no one hears it, if no one understands it, if no one does anything with it, arguably it was pointless having that investment of time, energy, creativity, and so on. We do love initialisms and acronyms in the research industry. This is one that I created quite a while ago now, which I think all good communication ought to be. Not Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. For me, this stands for memorable, actionable, succinct, and arguably most important, human. So I think any piece of communication, the receivers have got to remember it. And arguably they should remember the communicator and remember them well. I mean, I've seen so many debriefs that were memorable, but not necessarily for the right reasons. I think they've got to be memorable, the message has got to be remembered. Arguably, it's got to result in something. It has to be actionable. I think any good piece of communication, it leaves the receivers in a different place. They're able to do something, they certainly know something new, maybe they're thinking and feeling differently. Again, I see a lot of output, whereas the receiver, I'm not sure how I should be feeling about this. I mean, personally, I love it when I see a slide that actually says, this is good news. And I think a lot of it is about clarity of purpose. As the sender, I should be really clear, where do I want to leave the receivers? What do I want them to know? What do I think they should do? How do I want them to feel? At the end of it, they should be under no misunderstanding as to whether they should be cracking open the champagne or having a sleepless night. But whatever it is, it should result in something. And also, I think it's about being succinct and short and snappy. Why tell people stuff that is just a nice to know? If it's a nice to know, but it doesn't address the business issues, if it isn't pertinent, if it isn't relevant, whack it in the appendix. Again, I think quite often in research, we confuse quantity of information with quality of thought and insight. And maybe it's a case that we want to sort of justify, you've spent all this money and we want to make you feel that you actually have got a return on that financial investment. Or maybe it's because we didn't really know why we were doing it in the first place, so we hope if we throw sufficient stuff at the audience, some of it will make sense, some of it will stick. Or maybe it's because it has cost us a lot of blood, sweat and tears and we want the audience to share our pain. Yeah, this has really hurt me and I want it to hurt you too. Now, I'd always been thinking, do they really know it? Is it actually going to move them forward? And if not, why mention it? And I think certainly any good debrief should pass what I call the elevator test. When someone walks out of the room or they close the report, they meet a colleague in the lift, in 30 seconds, a minute, they should be able to explain to them fundamentally what they found out, what it means for them, and what they're going to do as a result. And again, if it's not clear in the communicator's head, then it's not going to be clear when it hits the receivers. So memorable, actionable, succinct, and I think the human is arguably the most important, because I think invariably any research or insight is trying to connect one set of flesh and blood with another set of flesh and blood. And my personal view, and it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, I think too much of what we produce is too cold and clinical and detached and impartial. And I think we should really be looking to sort of bring this alive and appeal to the heart as well as the head. Most of the people we're communicating to are human beings. The most stony-faced client at the end of the day will go home and roll around on the carpet with their kids or their cat. They have credit card bills. Some of them have a sense of humour. Maybe even some of them have sex. And I think it's about sort of trying to reflect that back and get them to connect that bit of flesh and blood with the other bit of flesh and blood, and arguably, with a bit of luck, with me as a bit of flesh and blood as well. So I could have had sham, I could have had hams. I decided to go for mash. And personally, I would check all of my communication against those four elements. Is it memorable? Is it actionable? Is it as short as it could be? And does it actually bring the stuff alive and try and connect emotionally as well as intellectually and cerebrally? Again, one of the things I was talking to someone about before just doing this was the fact that I think increasingly when we communicate insight or research findings, I think it's part of a two-way communication. I think we shouldn't be just thinking that we transmit one way into the ether and then walk out the door and hope something happens. Increasingly, I'm finding that a lot of my clients are actually saying, don't just help us to present the findings, but help us to then facilitate after that. How do we then build upon what we've communicated? How do we turn this into a decision-making, action planning session? And arguably any research output is the answer to questions. So we're trying to show, one, that we've actually heard you, and this is what we think the answer is. But then also, arguably, we want to know now, what are you going to go away and do that, and can we help you to decide that? So I think a good debrief, a good insight communication is actually part of an ongoing two-way communication. My starting point, I have to say, for any kind of debrief or presentation or report would be to go back to the client and remembering that the research is a means to their end, and just reminding myself why we were doing it. I mean, if I was going to write a pitch or proposal to a client, I would always be asking myself, what are the issues that this is going to address? What are the questions that they want answers to? What are the issues that they want to address? What are the needs they have that they're looking for solutions for? What hypotheses are we testing? Arguably, in any piece of communication, I should have clarity of purpose in terms of where I want to leave them, but I also probably want to remind myself, where did they want to be left? In terms of what did they want to know? What did they hope to do? What decisions did they hope to make? Fundamentally, why are they spending the money? When I was at RI, the phrase that I picked up there that has always stayed with me was, what keeps Douglas awake at night? Douglas being Douglas N. Daft, who was real name, I just love the name, chairman and CEO of Pepsi at the time. And I was always told, when you're writing a pitch or proposal, try and think what's keeping Douglas awake at night and how can you show that you're going to help him to sleep more easily. I've shown this slide probably, at least once a week for about 12 years. And it was only earlier this year when I was doing a bit of work with Waitrose Insight team that one of the delegates said, I know him. Apparently he's a really nice guy. Douglas and Delphine Daft. They're Australians and very hospitable, apparently. Anyway, I think it's about having the clarity of purpose. What are the issues they want help with? What are the questions they want answering? And I think it's about, right up front, being really clear, why are we doing this? Because if you're not, and if you're really sort of vague and woolly and fuzzy, God knows what you're going to end up with. So this is what customers wanted. We didn't really clarify that, so we ended up with all sorts of weird and wacky and off-the-wall solutions. Personally, I find what finance budgeted for resonates with me, and what production manufactured looks not only over-engineered but rather dangerous. But I think it's about being really clear, why are we doing this? And then I think the danger is that you do the research and you forget, because you've immersed yourself in all of this, you forget at the end why you were doing it. So, before putting fingers to keyboard with a debrief, I would just then be reminding myself, what were the issues? What were the questions? What were the hypotheses? Why were they spending the money? I always remember very early on in my career as a researcher, I was on the agency side working for an agency that doesn't exist anymore called IMR, which stood for Industrial Market Research. We used to call it IMR because we hoped people would think the I stood for international, because that sounded a bit sexier. But I always remember we did a bit of work for the RAC. I mean, we're going back 20 years, so I don't think it matters saying this now. I could say a well-known automotive breakdown recovery company, but it was the RAC. And they were losing market share, and they were looking to rebrand. And they were thinking, if we rebrand, do we gain more customers than we lose? How do we minimise the ones we lose, maximise the ones we retain and gain, etc. And at the centre of this was thinking about, do we sort of, refresh our brand and come up with a new logo? So they had at the time, and I'm sure a lot of you will remember this rather sort of fusty, crusty blue heraldic shield thing. And they were thinking about going for this kind of funky, sexy 1990s orange thing. And basically they want to know, do we stick with the blue or go with the orange? Anyway, my agency went away and we conducted some very extensive research, very expensive research, and we came back and it was the classic research debrief, 200 slides, 3 hours, or if they were really unlucky, 300 slides in 2 hours, and I've been there before. And we gave them some really interesting stuff. In the north they do this, the south they do that, men prefer this, women prefer that, really interesting stuff. And I always, very junior, so I absolved myself of all blame. And I remember we sat down at the end of this and we felt really smug because we'd given them a lot of really interesting stuff. And I always remember there was this pause, and then the most senior guy on the client side said, so, what do you recommend? Do we stick with the blue or do we go with the orange? And there was this almost like Pinteresque silence and a feeling of sort of dread that kind of just spread around the room as we all thought, oh shit, we forgot that. And what made it even worse was after this long pause, the most senior guy on our side, and we thought he was going to say something really profound, just shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't know, it's up to you really. All they needed was one word, orange. The answer's orange. You don't believe us? Here's a bit of evidence to support it. But we had got so involved with and so immersed in and drowned in the data and the research and the methodology, we got really excited about all of that, we'd completely forgotten why they were spending the money. I don't think I'll ever work for the RAC again. And I think that everyone's delivering solutions these days. I think it's basically just giving sensible, action-orientated answers to business questions, to commercial questions. Does anyone read Private Eye? Yeah, a few bit excellently. Well, up until quite recently, Private Eye used to, every issue, have this little section called Solutions, where they had quotations from genuine adverts from firms allegedly delivering and providing solutions. So a bit of a quick quiz here. You tell me what you think these organisations are flogging. So what about first management solution providers? It's actually drinks. Integrated battlefield solutions? Tanks, well done. Apparel hanging solutions? Hangings. This is a good. Engineered access solutions? Doors?
Ladders?
Door handles. High access solutions. That's the yeah. I mean, I know it could be lifts, it could be escalators. No, it was ladders. Fenestration solutions. Windows. I don't know why this one makes me laugh. Your seeding sodding solution. Yeah, lawn care. This one I love, demand responsive transport solutions. Taxis, yeah. I think it's a firm in South London where they slip the cars through your letterbox. They're not a taxi firm. They are providing demand responsive transport solutions. What about alternative sitting ergonomic furniture solutions? Chairs. Yeah, I don't know what's alternative about chairs, but yeah, I mean I was thinking bean bags, but no chairs. And probably the most convoluted of the lot. Crew management solutions to the marine industry. Fish. Oh, I think I heard it. Sailors. It's a recruitment agency for temporary sailors. I mean, everyone's allegedly delivering and providing solutions. What I think it's about is basically sort of identifying what I call the value sweet spot. And I always think that customers, clients, end users will have lots of different needs, and I, as a potential supplier, will have lots and lots of capabilities. And all I'm trying to do is identify where the overlap is and be really, really clear. What's your question so that I can come up with an answer? What's your issue so I can help you with that? And I think once you've reminded yourself why the hell were they spending the money, the thing then is to try and identify the insight, or at least the gorilla. Now, I always think here of a guy called Alan Mitchell, who's a marketing journalist. And I once heard him speak many years ago, and he was asked what he thought the difference was between a researcher and a journalist. And he referenced this experiment with the gorilla on the basketball court. Has anyone come across this? Yeah, I mean, quite a few nods. I mean, for those that don't know, it was back in the 70s, it was originally done at Harvard. They told the spectators of this basketball game to count the number of times the ball was passed between the players. That was their instruction. And then, while the game was in full flow, a guy dressed in a gorilla outfit wandered quite blatantly and boldly and baldly around the court for about 5 minutes and then disappeared. And at the end of the game, the professors said to the spectators, who were very, very bright Harvard undergrads, who spotted the gorilla? And I think it was about sort of a third of the audience spotted the gorilla, because the rest were too busy counting the number of passes. And Alan Mitchell said he thinks that's the difference between researchers and journalists. The average researcher is taught to count the number of passes, whereas the average journalist knows it's about spotting the gorilla. And I would argue we need to do both. Yeah, I mean, what we do needs to be valid and robust, etc., etc. But we mustn't actually get so immersed in all the data we forget about what is it actually telling us. The example that Mitchell cited was when he was looking at the new launch of a Coca-Cola variant. I think it was lemon Coke or something hideous like that. But anyway, and he was given loads and loads of data that he had to plough through, and he couldn't really find that journalist's angle. And then all of a sudden, he spotted this. That Coke's total sales were the same as the amount by which Walmart had actually grown in that year. Walmart being obviously one of the retailers that Coke was going to be channeling this new variant through. And he thought, that's the gorilla, that's my angle. And I think it's about being able to look at the data and stand back and actually spot either the gorilla or, dare I call it, the insight. Now, I realise that this is a very dangerous word in a forum like this. You ask a dozen researchers for their definition of insight, you're going to usually get a dozen different definitions. So my view on this would be, firstly, just to go back to a dictionary definition. So these are the two that I've got above my desk. And for me, the word that stands out here is understanding. I think it's about the audience, the receivers, just being able to get it, that they can grasp it, that it resonates, that it makes sense to them. And I think also, it's maybe important to think what isn't an insight. Maybe what isn't an insight is, something that's so obvious that people just go, well, yeah, I know that. I mean, I actually saw a debrief recently where this sentence was allegedly an insight. It was the first bullet point on a slide entitled Key Insights. In times of austerity, people are looking for value for money. Well, you don't say, Sherlock. Yeah? I mean, that's not an insight to me. Or, anything that begins 4 out of 10. Again, that's not an insight. I would say that's a fact, that's a finding, that's a learning. For me, what I think is, getting close to an insight is where you go beyond the what to maybe the why and certainly the so what and what next. Because I think if all I get is the what, 42%, blah, blah, that doesn't help, that doesn't tick the actionable box. What am I supposed to do with that? But maybe if I can understand why it's 42 rather than 52, maybe, and I want it to be 52 or 62, maybe that then unlocks some kind of action in terms of, what that means for me and what I do. And I think it's also, going back to the H in MASH, recognising that usually insights are about people. It's about what people do, or how people feel, or what people think. I mean, a really nice one I came across recently was I did some work with the insight team of a well-known British broadcasting company, and it was BBC. And they've got a radio station, let's call it Radio 1, where the target demographic is fairly young people. And they had their 40th birthday, and they made a big song and dance, literally a big song and dance about this 40th birthday party. And then they found out that only about sort of 20% of their target audience were at all engaged or interested in this. And then, bless you. And when they went out, they went back and found out the why behind that what, it was because, a 40th birthday is totally irrelevant to a 19-year-old. Now, knowing that, hopefully that then tells me what I should do when I'm 50. Maybe don't make a big song and dance about it. So my definition of an insight, and this is with huge humility, would be that I think, an insight is about something that's connected to human beings, to people, that represents a truth, a need, a concern, a desire, a fear, yeah, that is real, that is relevant to this audience, and arguably what's an insight for one audience won't be for another, and that resonates with them, that they can get it, they understand it, it makes sense. I should arguably be able to express it simply, thinking about the S in MASH, and arguably they should also then be able to do something as a result of that knowledge, thinking about the A in MASH. So that would be, with huge humility, my definition of an insight. And I think, what it should be doing is that it passes not just the elevator test, but the so what test. I mean, so often I still sit through debriefs or look at debriefs where at the end of it I just think, well, so what? What's this mean? What am I supposed to do with it? Thinking about summarising and crystallising, this is probably my favourite example I've come across recently of really, really good précis. Can everyone read that? I absolutely love it. Good God, I'm pregnant, I wonder who did it. And thinking about the 631 other emails in the inbox, I would always be thinking about this as well. What is it that's in there that's going to actually make them click on it, read it, understand it, and do something with it? Arguably, I think the insight, also thinking in terms of who the audience is, then drives everything else. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a great fan of templates, because I think, a template forces you to tell lots of different stories in the same way. And I actually think, I'd be thinking about what's my gorilla or my insight or my insights first. Who am I communicating these to? And that, I think, then drives everything else. The order in which I give the information, maybe the amount of detail I go into, the length that's needed, certainly the language I use. If I'm talking to a bunch of, really experienced MAG-est experts, I can talk about MAG-est. If I'm not, maybe I need to think about a different way to express that, and so on. So I think, it's thinking about the audience, but also thinking about the insight. And also, I think, being clear what kind of a story this is. Is it a good news story? Is it a not so good news story? Is it really simple, go with orange, ditch blue, or is it more nuanced and complicated than that? Again, I think a lot of it is about having a real sort of confident point of view on what I think the story is, and then managing the audience's expectations as to that. It's like if I go and see a rom-com at the cinema, I'm going to maybe be a little bit sort of pissed off if halfway through one of the two lovers kills the other in a really brutal manner. Regardless of whether they then come back as a ghost or not. Because I'm not expecting that, because it's supposed to be a rom-com. Same sort of thing, I think it's about managing the audience expectations in terms of what kind of a story this is. But again, I need to be really clear about that, and then deliver to the expectations that I've set up. And thinking about the succinctness, I love this quotation from Picasso. And I think this really resonates with me when it comes to research. Usually we don't have to create something from nothing. Invariably we've got too much, we need to simplify it down. And this, I think, again, for me, goes back to the language. The more I can actually talk their language, the more I can talk really human, simple, tangible, concrete language, the better. And finally, thinking about sort of crystallising and summarising, apparently when Michelangelo, and this might be apocryphal, but when Michelangelo was apparently asked how he would sculpture a lion, he apparently said, I start off with a block of stone, and I step back and I think that's a lion. And then I chip away and chisel away at anything that doesn't look like a lion. And I think that's what a good communicator of insight does. They step back and they think that's a lion, that's a hippopotamus, that's a giraffe, and then they actually chip away anything that doesn't look like that. They don't just put a load of stuff in because we found it out. they have an opinion in terms of what the insight is, what kind of a story this is. And then I think it's about using the data to support that story rather than confuse or complicate it. And this is where I think, it's not just learning from journalists, but maybe from, lawyers and barristers. Any barrister knows that they start off by telling the jury, my client's innocent or guilty. And then they bring to bear all the witnesses and evidence and exhibits that support that contention. Yeah? So the answer is orange. Ditch blue, go with orange. I'm going to tell you why I say that. I've got a really clear, confident point of view on why I'm saying that, and I'm explaining, not just what I'm saying, but why I'm saying it. And then just in case you're in any doubt, at the end, maybe I'll help you with the elevator pitch, the elevator test, by just really summarising the fundamental findings and repeating, members of the jury, you've got to let this guy off. And I think once you've got the story clear, it's then thinking about the order in which you say it. And we all know that good stories have a beginning, middle and end. I prefer to think in terms of hook, line and thinker. Again, this is borrowing from journalists. I think there has to be a very clear line, a very clear storyline. And again, I'll be thinking, how simple is it? How complicated is it? Are there 3 themes here? I'm going to talk about price, product and service. Are there 4 issues here? Are there 5 insights I want to get across? Are there no insights but just 3 really interesting facts that I found out? Yeah, I'm really clear about the story, and then I think about the most compelling, logical way in which to order that. But I think what a good story also has is a hook. Something that grabs the audience's attention, that piques their curiosity, that engages them, that makes them want to stick with this. Again, I think it's like learning from journalists. It's like the headline that screams from the newsstand that makes you want to stop and buy the paper. I mean, this well-known British broadcasting organisation I worked with recently, they actually started, they send a lot of their stuff out by email, and they realised if each email is competing with another 631, actually putting a heading like Strictly Come Dancing Viewing Figures Week 12 isn't exactly going to get the pulse racing. If they actually put a heading that says sack Brucey, someone might actually open it and read why they're suggesting that we sack Brucey. So I think there has to be that hook that pulls people in. You've then got your line, hopefully a compelling, logical structure, and then I think there has to be the payoff, the thinker. And for me, this is the so what and where do we go from here? And certainly, if this is a debrief that's being communicated face to face, this is the kind of the launch pad for further discussion and action planning. What does this mean? What next? And most storytellers, if you think about novelists, playwrights, they tend to use denouements. They build to a denouement. There's a story arc. Whereas I think journalists recognise that you put the punchline first, because maybe you can't guarantee that the audience is actually going to read till the end. And it's one of the reasons why I think the standard research debrief that follows what I call a whodunit approach, where there's a murder, the detective comes in, he interviews all the witnesses, there's lots of clues, lots of red herrings, and we find out whodunit on the last page. Maybe that doesn't work, or certainly doesn't work for a lot of stories. Because can we actually guarantee that the audience is actually going to read till the end? Again, I see so many debriefs where we start off with the methodology and the sample size and who we spoke to, and then maybe we get into what they told us, and with a bit of luck, they tell us things in terms of issues and themes rather than the order and structure of the discussion guide. And then if we're really lucky, we might end up with some conclusions and recommendations at the end, and the marketing director left an hour ago to go to another meeting. So maybe rather than actually thinking in terms of the classic Agatha Christie, one could potentially take a leaf out of this guy's book. Columbo, my favourite detective. Every episode of Columbo, before Peter Falk comes shambling in his dirty raincoat, you know who done it, you know how they've done it, and invariably you know why they've done it. But it doesn't make it any the less interesting. Arguably it makes it more interesting, because that's your hook, but you're still waiting for the thinker, which is, how does Columbo actually catch the murderer? So maybe there's nothing wrong with actually starting off by saying, the answer's orange. End of presentation. Oh, you want a bit more? Okay, let's have a chat about that. And let's move towards what does this mean and where do you go with that? one of the things I use is to structure is just post-its. I mean, I'm a great fan of post-its, but I actually, if I was going to structure a debrief, I just write on all the key points I want to get across, big numbers, interesting quotations, whatever it might be, just down on post-it notes. And I wouldn't worry about the structure to begin with. I just get it out there. And once I've exhausted all the things I need to say, then I'll be thinking about how do I order it. Maybe thinking, well, that goes with that and that goes with that. That's all about price, that's all about product. And then I'll be thinking, okay, I've got 4 things I need to cover. What's the most compelling order in which to say those? And in my experience, if you get the line straight, the hook and the thinker kind of look after themselves, because it soon becomes evident what's your best starting point and what you want to leave them with. And also, it's just fun to do. And I think, regardless of the medium, the length of the final delivery, if you've got those insights that are driving the story and you've got a logical, compelling hook, line and thinker structure, then hopefully it passes both the elevator and the so what test. And you have a skeleton, and it's entirely up to you how much stuff you want to add to that, maybe dependent upon the audience. And again, it's the way that journalists think. Here's a bit of research that I was involved with once ago, where it was all about the way people felt when they complained about online service. And what the insight or the gorilla was that people don't want an immediate answer, they want an immediate response. They just want to know that their complaint has been heard and someone's going to do something and get back to them at some point. So this was the hook. Brands must get set for the swift response. Hopefully that's suitably intriguing that you want to read the subheading. And then you give the audience the opportunity of either reading on more, you give them the option of really drilling down and going into all the data, you give them the option of actually reading all the case studies and the interviews. But good journalists know you give the audience the option of either just skimming over the top or drilling down. And if you skim over the top, you still get the same story as if you drill down. I don't know how many people know Dilbert, but I am. I love this cartoon. The trouble is, if you give them too much stuff to drill down into, the danger is you lose the skeleton and you get things like, are there any questions about the content? There was content. And one final thing I'll just leave you with is just thinking again about, if you're going to be using PowerPoint, if the people that are going to be using this have to then disseminate it around their organisation, do they want to be seen to be associated with this? What does it say about them or their perception of themselves or the way that they feel other people perceive them? So unfortunately, I think the way that something looks, it does have an impact upon how the content is received and whether it's remembered. And that's where I think, finally it's about learning from advertising. Good advertisers know, the power of the image. I mean, something like this, you don't need the tagline, the image says it all. Probably my favourite example of this is that. This is from a book called Truth, Lies and Advertising by a guy called John Steele. And he and his colleagues did some work for Porsche. And apparently, when they came to the debrief, they started off with this. And I think I'm right in saying this was all they showed them. And for me, this is a fabulous, fabulous visual hook. Because what it's saying is, people who drive Porsche love Porsche, people who don't think that about people who do. And they went straight from that hook into, okay, what does this mean? Where do we go from here? Now, a really, really lovely visual hook that grabs the attention, engages the brain, encourages debate, and stays in the mind. So I think what I would recommend is, thinking about the purpose of your communication, thinking about the audience, thinking about what kind of a story this is, thinking about how you're going to structure it, thinking about how you make it as concise as possible, maybe thinking about how you're going to then help to use visual and design to tell it. And most sort of marketing professionals would always recommend using a brief and writing a brief. And here I borrow from Lucy Davison from Caine's Mustard Marketing, where any sort of design or marketing job that she has, she will start off by writing a brief. You know, thinking about who's the client, who's the target audience, what are the key messages, what's the tone of voice, what visuals do we need to use, what do we include, what do we exclude. And actually the brief that I've put up here, she actually created in order to come up with that. Yeah, and she said, you know, any good marketer, you know, before actually starting to come to the solution, will step back and actually, you know, just write a brief in terms of what am I trying to communicate to whom and why and how am I going to do that. So that's it. Very, very, very quick cook's tour of my views on this subject. We're going to sort of open it up to sort of Q&A shortly, but all I would say is, you know, I mean, hopefully I have, you know, left you with something to think about, but what I would really recommend is maybe not just taking away sort of thoughts, but maybe also thinking how do you translate those into actions. And as my good mate Albert Einstein said, if you go on doing what you've always done, you'll go on getting what you always got. So I'd actually be thinking of how do you pass what I call the knowing-doing gap, because if you know what you could do and you should do, but you don't do anything with it, you might as well not know it. So maybe, you know, after tonight, you know, just think, well, you know, what have you been reminded of? Maybe what have you learned? What's stuck with you? And how do you actually put that into practice so that it does actually have a genuine impact? I think the slides are going to be sort of sent to you. If so, I'd point your attention to this, which would be maybe a sort of source of further inspiration. And these are just some books off of my shelf. But certainly, if you want to sort of get the juices flowing, some of these books are really good for just bringing a greater balance between the left and the right brain, as it were, just being more creative. Storyproof is a fabulous book. I don't know if anyone's come across this, but it explains the sort of the science behind why humans love stories, and why stories are so powerful, and why it's just an inherent human activity, storytelling. And on the sort of visual design side, I'll probably recommend David McCandless, who wrote the book Information is Beautiful. He's now written another one called Knowledge is Beautiful, and his website's called the same thing, informationisbeautiful.net, I think it is. Final thing I would say is, I've been talking about borrowing from journalists and lawyers and advertisers tonight. I just think it's about borrowing and stealing from people, but stealing from the best. And I always think here of Michael Caine, the actor, when he was asked why he had improved as an actor. And personally, I think it's a dubious point whether he has or not, but when he was asked why he thought he'd improved, he said it's because throughout his career he's stolen, but stolen from the best. So back in the 70s, when he was a relatively young actor working with Laurence Olivier on the film Sleuth, he thought, I can't be as great as Olivier, but how do I get closer to him? So he'd watch the way that Olivier would pause before delivering a line, curl a lip, raise an eyebrow, twitch a nostril, whatever it was, and if he thought, well, that's good, he'd think, could I borrow that? And the next time it was appropriate or relevant, he'd try it out. And if it worked, he'd make it part of his repertoire, and if it didn't, he ditched it and he lost nothing. And I think, if you want to sort of communicate well, it's about sort of just being aware of, you as the consumer of communication, going back to my starting point, all those 3,000 messages that are bombarding you every day, thinking which ones actually cut through, which ones do I remember, which ones do I act upon, and what could I borrow from those? And continually learning, borrowing, stealing from the best. So, just give it a go. Any comments or questions?
Let's have a quick round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. I mean, really, really stimulating, and we've probably got 10 minutes worth of questions. We've got to be out of here by 8, so give Danny the opportunity to have a real glass of wine or something.
Very nice.
Yeah. Okay, any questions? Steve?
Danny, thank you for that. I really enjoyed it. And I agree with everything you say about the need to get the message summary in early so that people know what's coming. about the need to be succinct, about the need to concentrate on building a story, about the need to understand what decisions hang on this particular thing. All of that I agree with. The thing that I quibble with slightly, and it's a general point, is about the focus on insight. Quite a lot of what we do does not involve insight, and there's nothing wrong with that. Quite a lot of what we do is we build a story based on fact. And from that fact, we deduce an argument that says, given this set of facts that we reveal to you, this is what you should do.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's a respectable thing to do, and I think it's worthwhile. Some people belittle it because they think insight is a higher calling. And when I hear that, I sort of, my bullshit meter starts to flash.
Yeah.
And other people argue that there has to be more. You know, if you've only delivered the facts, you've done something shallow, and it's not appropriate. So that's my only point.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't disagree with you on that. I mean, funny enough, that well-known British broadcasting company I mentioned, their head of insight, when I was actually creating some, some training for them, we actually had a disagreement on that because she felt that every single thing that her team produced had to have an insight or insights, and I actually disagreed. And I said, well, it doesn't have to. No, I actually, I totally agree with you. I mean, actually, you might just be communicating facts, findings, information. I think, all the other things I've said still apply to that. I mean, what I would probably say is it's about, again, the clarity, that I'm clear as the communicator that this debrief has 2 insights, this debrief has 1 insight, this debrief has no insight, but 3 really interesting bits of information.
Yeah,
so I wouldn't disagree with you.
I'd also say that the thing about an insight is it's induction. So from bits and pieces of this jigsaw, you think you've seen the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but you mustn't overclaim. Because sometimes, I know I have been to presentations and seen researchers overclaim, and they've come up with a really interesting idea or theory. But it is only an interesting idea or theory based on bits and pieces. And they're presenting this as a God-given fact, or rather as an inspired fact, which or their God has given to them, which they are.
Yeah, actually, I mean,
even though there's $1 million worth of investment.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd actually probably just a couple of things I'd add to that. When I first, I'm an old quant researcher, and when I was introduced to the concept of storytelling, I kind of rebelled against that because I thought, for me, stories imply fiction, something that's made up. Yeah, and I'm a purveyor of truth. So I think, I mean, whatever we say, it has to be, we've got to be able to support it. There's got to be, robust evidence to support it. I think all we do is we borrow some of the sort of the skills and the tools from storytellers in order to communicate that truth. And probably the other thing I'd say is I actually think that the word insight or insights is just massively overused. I mean, I really hate it to see a slide that's titled Key Insights when I don't think they are. And I don't think there's anything wrong with just saying key findings. Perfectly acceptable. I think actually the more people overuse the word insight, I think it actually then demeans it when it is a genuine insight.